In this next part, we're going to just start on our multiplier UI. So the first one we'll do is we'll create all the elements we need for creating the host session widget. So I'm going to create a new folder in here. Actually, no, I'll just create the class and do it there. So the first class we're going to create is the button game widget. So I'm going to call it sButton game widget. So this will be a button to select a game type when you host a game. And this is going to inherit from our button. Sorry, sButton. So the button we just created. If you're not creating this button, just inherit this from the common common base button. And I'm going to put it in the multiplier. So we've got UI menu and then it's multiplier. So this is the multiplier menu folder with all UI C++ classes and make them abstract. And we're going to need to initialize. And the button is going to be configured by the game data. So we're going to need a function to set the game data on the button, and then we'll just have a function to update the text. And then this button is going to have its own text block and description field because it's going to be slightly different style of layout of button. That's why we're just not using our base button. We're creating a new button for the actual game display. So it's going to have a name and a description field, and then and there's another text field. There's a third text block that comes with the button. So in the button base, there is the button text block here. We'll use that as the third piece of information. If you recall from our game data, if I can remember where that is, go back to our game data quickly. So in here we've got a game map, we've got a game name, and we've got a game description. So we can use those three text blocks to display all that game data information. So where was I? Yeah. So this will be the game name, this will be the game description, and the one from the base class will be the game map. And that's just how I'm configuring it. You can configure them anyway. So we don't need the base. Let's just close that. We don't need the data. Right, so we're back here. Construct these functions. Don't think we need to do anything in on initialize for this actually. Probably don't even need that, but it's not going to hurt to have it there. So for the set game data, we're passing in game data here, so we just need to check that that's valid. And then if it's valid, we're gonna want to cast to the ID's type. It's always good to pass as an ID and then just cast it down to the class. So we're going to need a reference to the asset manager for that. It's going to include the asset manager, and then we're just going to get the primary asset object and cast that down to our game data class, which we'll need to include for. So the asset manager is going to get the asset object of this type. So for this button, we're going to want to initialize the actual button itself. So we need to talk to the base class. And the way this is done at the moment, so if we go back to our button base again, this is done on the pre-construct. So rather than do this on pre-construct, what we're going to do is we're going to move all this to a init button function. So we're just going to put that here. I'm just going to move all this down to here. So we still want to call it on pre-construct, but we also want to be able to call it from the child class. And the reason we want to do that again here is because we know we have a valid game data. So we've set the game data. We just want to reinitialize the button with the game data, and then we'll call our update button text function that we've got below. And this is where it's going to pass in the parameters from that game data. So like I showed before, you've got the game map. Got the game name. And game description. And then the other thing we want to set is the image. So we're going to grab the image from the game data and set that on this button will display the map image or whatever it is. So again, we're just going to, from the game data, get the game image. But because we've made it a soft object pointer, we need to actually load it. So you can see this load synchronous here. And what that'll do is that'll attempt to load that actual texture into memory, and or if it's already loaded, it'll just use it. And then on our button has a texture that's again in the parent class of this widget. Oops. We just want to set that button texture to the image that we just loaded. And I'm going to do load synchronous again. And then there's another function in there, which is set button settings. And we'll go have a look at that. And that's just setting up the material parameters. So what we could do here is actually pass in a struct and have these. So in the game data, you could have an image and then have a struct that has all the settings for that image. So you could configure different opacities and locations and offsets, all these different settings for the scale, and pass that in a struct and then configure it for that particular game. We're just going to set the texture for now. That'll refresh that button texture. So that button texture, to show you that, is the texture 2D, and it's coming from the game data, which is the soft object pointer for texture 2D. So now just to update our text on our button, we're just going to check the button text block. So this is the one from the base class. It's valid. We're going to set the button text field, and then we're going to set the button text. And then on the other two, you can just check that the buttons are valid. We need to include the common text block, and then we can just do set text based on the text that we're passing in, and that's that. And that's all we need for our game button. The next is we want to create an actual game display widget, which is going to encompass this, but come in back into multiplier, add a new class. This is going to be called game display widget. And this is going to inherit from common user widget. Because it's not going to be activatable on its own, it's just going to be used within a widget. We're just going to use a common user widget here. So in our game display, we're again going to make it abstract, and then we're going to add a delegate here for when the widget is selected. So when this game is selected, so it's an on game selected display, will be the name of our delegate, and we'll just add a on initialized, and we'll add the delegate here. So we're going to need a reference to our game button, which is the class that we just created before. So we'll bind that to a widget. That'll be our game button widget there. Add forward declaration for that. Now each game display is we're gonna populate the information on it through passing the game data that is appropriate to this button. So we're going to need a function to set the game data on this button, and then we'll also add a property to store that. Which will make this in protected. So we'll need a property to store that game data that's assigned to this button, or this display, sorry. And then we'll create a function to retrieve that. So whatever needs to can get access to the data that's assigned to this display. And then we'll just have a function that is called on game selection. So it means this display was selected as the game type, and that will handle what needs to happen there. So we'll just build those. So in initialize, we need to assign an on-clicked event. So we're going to just check that our game button is valid, and then we'll assign that. Now with the common UI, the on-clicked events, so normally it'd be like on-clicked or something like that. So you can see on-clicked there, but the common UI has some functions that just retrieve the delegate for you. So it's just on-clicked as in a function. And then we're going to add the object. This class, and we are going to add our what is this? This display widget, and we're just going to assign it to that on game selection function. And then in our on game selection, we are just going to broadcast that delegate that we created. So the on game display selected, broadcast, and we're going to send our game data that's assigned to this button. Now in our set game data, we need to check that the data is valid and that our game button is valid, because we're going to assign the data to the button. If you recall, we had a set game data function in the button as well. So we're just going to assign our game data ID to the data, and then we'll send it to our game button widget, which is set game data and data. That is it for this game display widget. It will make a bit more sense once we get into the editor this one, I think. So the next one we want to create is the display list. So that the list will be what contains a list of all the games. So this is for a single game. When I say game, it's the game mode. So every piece of game data we have will be a game, and then the next class that we want to create is a list of these game datas. So we're just going to create a new class, and we're going to call it sGame display list widget, and it's going to inherit from the same as this one, common user widget. And again, abstract. And we've got two delegates we want to add here. So we want one for when the game list is created, and we want the same again when the on game selection has occurred. So when we select something in the list, then we're going to do some actions. We'll need a native construct for this one. We're going to need also a load game list function. So we're going to put that under projected. And then we're going to actually need a widget that is the game list. So we're going to use depending on how you're going to display them, if you're going to display them the same as I do, I don't know if you've seen in the preview, but they're down the side in a vertical list. So we're going to put it in a vertical box, but if you want to have it horizontal or anything like that, then just change this to whatever you need. But that's our list of games basically. So this will be a list of the previous widget that we just created, the game display. And then we can create our delegates in here. The delegates, part of this load game list process will be to get a list of all the game data assets in the game, and then we'll load them. And then once they're loaded, we'll then create the list based on data in the, so like for example, if it's including game list true, that it's going to be in the list. So we need to filter all the assets by this list here. So we're going to need a couple of functions for that. So it's going to be on game data loaded and on game list creation. So, and then there will be, so we've got the on game selection event, but we're going to want a function for that, and will be a U function because it's coming from delegate, and then the on game display selection. So will handle when it's selected. We're going to need a function to actually just retrieve the list of game. It'll come into play later and use it in our event here, but it'll need external access, so make that public, and that just is going to return the list of widgets. We'll build that out. So in the construct, we just want to call this load game list. That's all we need to do there. And in the load game list, we just first want to check that the game list itself is valid. So we've got a proper reference to our vertical box. We want to clear the children in the vertical box so there's no leftovers, and we just need an include for the vertical box. Now we're going to go to the asset manager and grab all the game data assets and load them. So we're going to need a reference to the asset manager. Include that. So what we're going to be doing is building an array of the primary data assets, which will be all the game data assets that we have in our project. And to do that, we need the asset type. And this is where we have that defined in our static game data. So we have a look at that. That is set to game data, and that is set in the asset manager in the editor as the data type. So once we have the data type, we can then go ahead and get a list of assets and output it to our array here. And then we can check that we actually got some hits. And then if we didn't, we'll just do a log, because if we don't, it's just going to halt the whole process. So we'll just put a log in here that the failed to find any game data assets. Maybe we haven't created them yet or something. It'll just prompt us to do that. But in here, we don't need bundles, but I'm going to pass an empty bundle to the load primary assets. So we just need to create a delegate for when it's finished. So we're going to call our on game data loaded function down here, and we're going to pass the game data assets list to that function. So we've got a delegate, and then we just need to load the assets. So we're passing in the assets, the empty bundles, and the delegate. So this tells it what delegate to call when it's finished loading. So then we end up in our on game data loaded function. So we're going to need a reference to the world here, so because we're creating widgets, so we're going to use the get owning player of this widget to check that we have a valid world, and if we don't, return. So if either of these are null, we'll return. no crashes. And then again, we'll just access our asset manager, and we're going to loop through all those game assets that we just passed in. So we want to loop through those. So we need to create a game display widget for each one if it should be in the lists. To check that, we need to cast to our asset type. We just include our sGameData.h, and we're casting to that type so we can read the data from it. So if that included in the list is true, then we want to go ahead and start creating the widget. So we want to check that the data has the, if you recall, the data has the widget it will use to display. So this is the class here, and we'll assign this in our data later, but the game display widget class is what will be used. So you could actually have a different display widget class for different game types and stuff if you wanted to, but just a convenient place to store a reference to a widget. Alternatively, you could just have it, on this widget itself. So like you can make this blueprint assignable or whatever, and then you could assign it in here, but it means when we create the widget for this, we have to remember to go in and assign that reference. Whereas on the game data, it's just, I don't know, I think it's a better place to put it. So now we want to create the widget. It's a bit of a long one, but we're creating that class that we made before, the game display widget. So we're going to need an include for that. So we're just calling create widget here, and we're using that reference which we know is valid to get the world. We're using the display class. Oh yeah, the display class is actually a soft class pointer. So it's not loaded at all yet. So we need to load that as well. And that'll load it and pass it in if it's not loaded. And then once we've created that widget, we need to set the data. So whatever data we're up to in the for loop, we want to assign that to this widget that we're creating. And then we just want to add it to our vertical box, so our game list. And you'll need to change that to add to horizontal box if you use a horizontal box. Then when all that is complete, down the bottom here, we want to call our function here on game list creation. In this function here, we want to broadcast that our delegate about the game list being created. We're going to get a list of all the widgets that we just created. So let's actually populate this. So it's just we're going to check that our game list is valid, and then we're just going to return the children of that vertical box, which is our game list. And then the game list isn't valid or whatever. We're just going to return an array of empty widgets, and we just have to ensure that wherever we use this, we'll null check the widget. So that'll get us our list, and then we're going to loop through that list. We're going to cast the widget to our widget type to ensure that it is our widget type that we have here, and then we're going to assign a delegate. When it's selected, we want to call this on game display selected. And if you recall, in our game display widget, we had that delegate in there. And then all we want to do with that is, when it is selected, we just want to broadcast our on game selected and send the game data that is that selection. So this whole part here is just to assign to just go through that list and assign the delegate. And that concludes our game list there. So now we actually want to create the hosting menu. Go back to here, add an Unreal class, and we're just going to call this, I'm going to prefix all the actual menus with menu, so S menu. This will be the host session widget. And this is going to inherit from the common activatable widget, because this will actually be what is loaded to our layer stacks that we set up in the previous episode. So again, start with the abstract. In the preview, you would have seen that I had a bunch of just a test settings there. I'll put in two of the settings just to show you how it's done, and that was just to show sort of how you would set up if you had different game settings that you might want to change. I can't really think of any settings off the top of my head. Maybe AI difficulty or something, like, I don't know, it's endless settings, but we'll just set up a couple of enums for some settings, so it's easily definable. They need to be different names, that's why I've just got those different 2, 3, 4, whatever, but this is just as an example of how you can include some settings in your sort of hosting screen, configure something to your game. We're going to need a native uninitialized in here, and we will need to initialize our text displays, so that'll be all those settings and other things. Now we're going to need a whole bunch of settings for like the actual structure of the hosting interface. So we're going to need a reference to the game list. So that'll display a list of the games. Or I'll just bring these over. So we're going to need, yeah, the game list, which we just created. We just need a reference to the actual list itself. And then this will be just the text of which one we've selected. So we'll update just a title text. Like you could have this do anything. You could update some images, have another box to say this is the one you've selected and this is what will, when you click launch, this is what's going to load. And then we just need the launch button and the back button, which is just our standard button base widget. We're going to need a reference to the game data. So this will be the actual game data that is currently selected. So when you click launch, that's the game data that's going to be used. And we'll use those events that we set up in the game list and all that to assign that. For the settings, so however many settings you're going to do, we just need a reference to what the current setting is. And then we're going to need some widget parameters for those settings as well. So we're going to need a text and a button for each. The text will be what the current setting is, and then the button will be to change that setting or cycle through those, what the available settings are, and that'll depend on how much you have in your enum here. So say it was, easy, medium, or hard, like that would cycle through each one. And then the other one that I demonstrated in the preview is the net mode. So that'll be the net mode, so online, LAN, or offline sort of thing. So we'll just forward declaration for that. And that's not a enum I've created, that's from the sessions. If we follow that, it goes straight into the common session subsystem, and that's the options there. And then we just need a text block to display what net mode we're currently on. And then again, like same as the settings, just a button to cycle through. All right, we're going to need a few more functions in here to handle all this settings and stuff, but let's just get started with what we've got here. So add those. And then on our initialize, we need to, we'll define what the default is for our net mode. So we'll call that function below. So we'll init the text displays. And then we need to just set all the on-clicked events for all our whatever buttons are on the display. So the first one we'll do is that change net mode. So we've got that above. And we're just going to add the same as before. We're just going to call that on-clicked event. This just needs a reference to the S button base widget. And then you can see here we need to have a function every time we change these settings. So we need to add the on network button clicked function. So I'll add that under the net mode down here, put it at the top. I usually put functions at the top and properties underneath. Just build that. And then when that is clicked, we just want to switch between all the net modes, and if we're on the last one, we want to go back to the start. It's going to be a similar setup for all the like the settings and things like that. If the current net mode, when we click the button, if the current net mode is online, we want to go to LAN. LAN, we want to go to online. If it's online, we want to go to offline, and so forth. So it'll go. So then it'll be back to the start. Then we just need to update the text display. So like the net mode text display. We're just going to check that the text is valid. We need to add the common text block load. And then we're just going to set the text to the enum display value. So it'll just be display value is probably just online, I'd say, or LAN, or whichever one it is. But so that's how we can grab just a string or like a text field from the enum. So we'll go back up to our constructor here, and we'll do the settings buttons. So I'll just copy into all these. The same deal, on clicked, and then we're sending it to a function. It's going to be very similar to the function we just created for this. So we'll put these functions at the top of the settings area. And these all need to have the U function at the top because they're coming from the delegates. I'm just going to copy this in because it's very similar to what we just had. If the current setting is set 1, change to set 2. If it's set 2, go back to set 1. It's just the cycle of toggling the button. So as you hit the button, it just toggles through. And then we're checking that our game setting text is valid, and we're doing the same thing with setting the text value to the display value. And the other one is exactly the same, except we're using a different enum. So back to our constructor again. With the other two, we've got the launch and back button, so we just want to bind to those. So we're just checking the buttons are valid, assigning the on-clicked event, and we need an on-launch and on-back function. I'll just put this at the top here. That go in line. Anyway, I'm going to leave the on launch because we need to do a bunch of stuff for that. But the back button, what we need to do here is just remove the host session widget from our layer stack. So we're just going to get a reference to the world. I think, I don't know if I need to get the owning player there or not to get the world, but I think it should be right. And then we're just going to get our root layout. So like we've done before. So get the primary game layout for the primary player using the world. So that'll return our root layout, and then we can go find and remove the widget from the layout for that, and then we just say it's this, so we're passing the host session. So if we clicked on something to get to this widget, it'll automatically go back to whatever is next in the stack, lower in the stack. That's that here. The other one we need to do is handle just our game list interfacing. So we're going to check if our game list is valid, include our game display list widget. And then we've got two delegates we're going to add here. So if you recall, we just created those before. Got the on game list created, and we've got the on game selected. So on list created is going to happen when the list is finished creating, and then we can use this to select an initial value from the list. So there's always something. So we've always got a valid selection, assuming that the list isn't empty, right? Or even then, if the list is empty, we could actually load some UI and display like no games found or something. But and the other one is when a game is selected, we then can update all the information, so the display and the game data. So add these up here as well. And remember, they need to be U functions as well. And this one's passing the game data, which will be this. So this is where we're going to need that function externally that we created before to get the list of games, or list of game widgets. And what we're going to do is just check that the first widget we get back is valid. And we're just going to select that as our selected game type for when the widget loads. So we're going to cast it to that game display widget. We're going to use that function that we created before to get the game data asset from the display widget. So now that we potentially have a valid game data here, we want to select it as our default selection, because this will happen as soon as the game list is created. And this will be our initial selection, let's say. So we're going to pass it to the on game selected. Now, if that data is not valid, then we don't want to do anything, right? So let's just pass that over. We'll just return if the data is invalid. But if it is valid, then we want to set it as our current. Keep getting the name mixed up. There we go. So the game data is set to our variable here, and then if that game, once that's set, we then want to update our UI with anything that we use to display from this game data. So we're gonna do the same as what we did before. So we need to read the game data. We have the ID here. We want to read the actual class data. So we're going to get the asset manager. We're going to cast it to our data type. So now we've got access to the game data, and we can update whatever we need to update. And in this instance, I just had the text field. So I'm going to just check that both are valid. So the text is valid, the game data is valid again. And then I'm going to set the text on that to whatever the currently selected game data is. And if you wanted to display some image somewhere, this is where you do that. Every time a new one's selected, it'll just grab the data from the game data and update whatever you need to update. So now there's a few things we need to still do. So we've got all our settings here have these text fields, and we just need to check. We just need to assign to the text blocks whatever the current value is. So all these need to be assigned to the text blocks. Otherwise, it's just going to be whatever the default text is on the text blocks when the widget loads. So in here, just going to copy in the net mode, the game settings, and the two game settings. I don't need to do the other one. What was the other one? I don't need to do this one because that'll happen when the game list is built, which we just did. So it's just the extra settings that we've got here in the net mode. So now we're on to this launch game, and there's a couple of things that need to happen here. We need to attempt a login, and we need to host a session. So we're going to put this in here, all those. So we want to check that we've got a valid player and world again in the login. And then we're going to get and that's so we can get a reference to our game instance. So we're going to just get the common game instance, and then we can use the the game instance to get access to the common user subsystem. So this is our first use of common user. And then in the user subsystem, we're going to bind to a delegate, which is the on user initialization complete. So basically once we log in, that's what's going to be called. So we want to bind to that event, and then we're going to need a function for on user login. And that has its own signature, so we need to bring in that signature as it is. So I'll put this here. And it's got the common user info, which we'll need to add a header for. And then success, which is Boolean, text for an error message. It's got some privilege struct here, and it's got a online context struct. So I think we can get away with some of these. I don't think we need this, because what we can do, we'll need common user info, that's right. So if we don't need core minimal here either, so we'll just replace this. But so if we just include common session subsystem, it should sort out all these references here. So all those structs are in that common session subsystem. So that saves us, link it to each one individually. So we'll just build that one. Now we want to check that that was a success, so we have logged in. Oh, actually, before we do that, let's go back to where that was. So we actually, that's binding to the delegate when it's complete, but we actually need to tell it to actually attempt to log in. So how we do that is, again, through the user subsystem, we say try login for online player, and then if we fail to log in, we'll just do an error log for now, but this obviously could be a place where we load a widget, do something that says you failed to log in. Maybe pop up a modal or something we can look at adding later, but this is just where we call our host. So if we've logged in, we can then go ahead and host the session. So now we're on to host session. And again, we just want to confirm a reference to the world, because we want to get the session subsystem again. So it's just all the same setup. So we've got our reference to our session subsystem, and we want to bind to the event on create session complete. So let's create that function. Put that underneath our user login. Before we start filling that out, we'll actually kick off the session creation. To create a session through the subsystem, we're going to call host session. And the host session takes a reference to the player controller, so we can use that get owning player. That's fine. Then here it needs a common session host session request. We're going to have to create that, and we'll make a function that does that. Here we will call our function to create that common session host session request. So let's make this function, and I'm going to put this up under host session here. So I'm just going to create a generic hosting request here. What we're going to do is we'll create a blank request like that. We want to just confirm that our selected game data ID is valid, because we're going to want to grab some data from our current selected game. And then to access that data, same as before, we're just going to go to the asset manager, cast that to our game data type here. What we need to do is we actually need to pass the game data through the hosted session. So when someone connects, they can grab whatever game data is for the game and begin loading whatever needs to be loaded. And if you recall, when we did our game mode configuration, and let's just go have a look at that quickly just to remind ourselves. So in our game mode, we had the handle data assignment, and that's where we're using this option string to get the data asset through. And that's how we're going to pass the data asset is through these option strings. So the first thing we'll do to do that is we'll create an f string of the data asset name, like so, and then we'll put in the result, put that name in the mode name for advertisement. So this is what's returned when you use the going back to the game mode again. When you use this is what that string is returning from the option string. It's the mode name for advertisement. So I'm just going to do our other result settings here. So the online mode, I'm just going to set that to online for now, but obviously this later we'll play with this. So, like it'll use our button, which is the online mode, so it'd be LAN or whatnot. I'm going to say use lobbies. We're going to pass our map, so whatever map is from the game data ID, we're going to set the map in the host session, and so when the people know what map to load, we're going to pass any extra arguments that are set in the game data. We'll pass in the max player count. And I'm not going to cover the additional settings at the moment. I just want to get them in the UI, but this is the extra args is where you'll start putting in all those extra settings. I just want to look into it further and make sure I get everything right. So for now, we'll just leave that out. So now that our request is created, we can return request. Result, sorry. No, it should be request. Named it wrong. There we go. So now that we have the request, we can pass it to the host session, and when the session creation is finished, we'll then fire this on session created. And in here, we're just going to do some logging, so to help us debug. So if it's successful, if it's not, just put in some logs. So session created and failed to create session. This warning so we can see it. And here, this is where you'll handle, like prompts and things, which we'll add down the track. And then I've just got to connect up. I didn't put the function call in the on-launch game, so that would have been really uneventful if I'd have forgotten that. So I'm just handling the online part now. So we're just gonna this is where you do some different things for the net mode, but we're just gonna do for the online for now, because since I'm restricting it to online, so we're just gonna attempt online login every time we go to launch the game. And by the way, this is online login to the session system, so we're using the we'll add that to the actually let's do that now so you know what I'm talking about. So if we go to our default engine.ini, scroll to the bottom, we just need to add two settings here, so online subsystem null and online services null. That's all we need for now. So that's what we're logging into, the subsystem null. So that's the last widget class we need to create. For the sake of keeping the episodes not so long, I'm going to end this video here, and then in the next tutorial we'll crack on with the in-editor creating of the actual widgets and the layout and how we use our classes that we just created. Please don't forget to like if you found this tutorial helpful, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future tutorials. You can join me on Discord or sign up to my Patreon, where you can get access to all my tutorials early and the project files, as well as gain access to behind the scenes on my current game development. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you next time.